Include terms and then explain in plain English, like you're trying to explain it to someone who's not in the real estate game, what that means can be helpful, especially when you're going direct to seller.
Welcome to the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Axel Ragnarsson, and on this show, I dissect how seasoned multifamily investors started, built, and scaled their businesses.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about crafting and presenting offers to sellers or to a broker, right? If there's a broker that's acting as an intermediary. And my objective in this episode is to share what we do in our business. We take a pretty formulaic approach to doing this and communicate why it's important for you to think about the offer presentation process, because it does impact how well received your offer is and how likely it is that you're going to engage in a productive dialogue with a seller. And presenting offers isn't solely about just saying your price and saying your terms. There's much more to this process. And it's important that you think at a higher level about this process within your business and you develop a process that works for you. And I'm going to share what we do in ours. And I think it's a great framework for developing this. But you want to return to some kind of offer presentation structure, process, etc., to increase the likelihood that your offers will be accepted. So let's just start with how we think about it in our business, right? Let's pretend that we're drafting an email to send to a broker or a seller that contains a purchase and sale agreement or an LOI or just, summarized bullet points of our offer. I like to think about it as kind of a sandwich, right? You got two pieces of bread, you got your sandwich in the middle, whatever, you got your meat in the middle. And we talk, and another way of thinking about it is just three distinct parts, three distinct components of the email in which you are presenting the offer. And if you're doing this over the phone, verbally, how you approach the presentation of the offer over the phone. So the top piece of bread, right? The first part of the offer, or the presentation, I should say, should contain some level of context or information about your experience and your ability to close, right? And we're talking multifamily here. This is important. And this also applies if you're buying a single family home, but that just takes the form of a pre-approval letter oftentimes or a proof of funds. In the multifamily world, you got to talk about what you've done in the marketplace. You've got to talk about your portfolio size. You got to talk about your ability to get to secure financing. If you got a lot of liquidity and you can include a proof of funds and you think that's going to be helpful, well, you should probably include that as well. So for example, right, leading the email in the actual or within the email in which you're presenting the offer could sound something like this. To provide more context on our ability to close, this year so far we have transacted 10 deals totaling 50 plus units. We're under contract on a 35 unit building in X town. We've worked with numerous local banks and lenders, list them if you have it, to secure financing on these assets and are really comfortable with our relationships with these banks. If you really want to go over the top, as I mentioned, attached is a proof of funds that give you a sense of our current liquidity. We've done many deals like this in the past, et cetera, right? Something similar to that. The more specific you can get, the more data points that you can provide, the better you're going to be able to communicate that, right? But in general, you want to prime the offer you're making with your ability to close so that the recipient of the offer doesn't have that as a question mark in their mind, right? They're just getting right into the meat and the potatoes. It's tough to present an offer where somebody's trying to dissect your price and terms, but they are also thinking about, can this person even execute on what they're offering me anyways, right? That's the other piece of this. Now, the meat of the offer, right? The second part of it, the meat in your sandwich here, is going to be the actual summary of the offer you're making. Your purchase price, your due diligence period, your earnest money deposit. Is it refundable? Is it non-refundable? If it's non-refundable, under which conditions does it become non-refundable? Is it after the DD period? Is it at contract signing? Do you have a financing contingency? Is there an appraisal contingency? How long do you have to close? Etc., right? Any important additional provisions or other terms in the contract that I didn't just mention? This is where you want to outline the actual components of the offer, right? The core pieces of it. And this is where you can also do a little bit of selling, or, there's some salesmanship that can go into this as well, right? And this is a little bit more applicable if you're making an offer directly to a seller who may not understand the implications of different terms. So, for example, if you're dealing with someone who's not really like a professional multifamily investor or real estate investor, and they've just bought a couple properties over the years, type of thing, or they inherited this building from someone that passed away in their family, or what have you, right? Any of these situations would apply to this. Why is it important that so you should outline the ramifications of what these terms mean in plain English, right? No financing or appraisal contingency, which means after our due diligence contingency expires and we are past due diligence, our earnest money is non-refundable, and if the deal doesn't close, you get to keep that. Now, if you're going to be trying to do something shady behind the scenes to get your earnest money back, whatever, okay, I get it. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you should be a little bit more forward about that. Maybe you should structure the contract differently. But when we are offering competitive terms, we like to provide some context as to what that means for the seller, right? Our non-refundable earnest money means that if the deal doesn't close, you get to take it away, right? Outlining that in plain English to a seller that isn't familiar with the game can be helpful as it relates to how they're receiving the offer. 10-day due diligence period, so you have closure on whether or not we're moving forward with the deal or not in a short period of time, and so that you're not tying this contract up or tying this deal up under this contract for an extended period of time with a buyer that you don't know is going to close, right? Include terms and then explain in plain English, like you're trying to explain it to someone who's not in the real estate game, what that means can be helpful, especially when you're going direct to seller. Now, the bottom bun here, right? The last components of the offer presentation process, the last piece. Again, this is much more applicable when you're talking about an off-market transaction where you're directly to seller or you're direct to seller, but you should share a few additional benefits as it relates to working with you. And some of these are going to apply even if you're working with a broker, but really this is going to be even more applicable in a direct to seller scenario. You should outline the amount of times you're going to need to access the property and how intrusive it's going to be to tenants, right? Oftentimes sellers, they're intimidated by the sales process, right? And it's so funny to be someone who's been in this game for a while and you're just not really thinking about this. The professional investors out there, which is the vast majority, if not everyone who's listening to this podcast, when you sell a building, you're not too concerned about telling your tenants that you're selling the property, right? I'm assuming most of the people listening to this podcast aren't concerned with that scenario. However, you would be shocked at how many mom and pop unsophisticated sub-institutional owners are petrified of that. So you should just, in plain English, try to alleviate that concern up front. We'll only need to access the property one or two times during the contract period, once for due diligence, the other for an appraisal. And these intrusions will be minimal to your tenants. We can also access the property under the guise of we're the maintenance team or we're the insurance or we're the bank or what have you, right? So that the sale stays private and confidential. You could also outline the benefits in working with you in terms of the savings from a brokerage commission standpoint, right? You can also talk about the ease in working with you as it relates to your ability to work with minimal documentation. While most buyers are going to request tax returns in a T12, we're comfortable proceeding with just a rent roll and making this an easy process for you from a documentation standpoint. Again, you should only be doing these things if it makes sense for you to do it, right? If you're buying a large multifamily deal, 100 plus units, and you're doing a full due diligence process with phase ones, with PCRs, property condition reports, with an appraiser where you're walking it with your GC or walking with your management company, okay, so maybe this doesn't apply. But if you are able to get a little bit more competitive with how you approach the deal-making process, you should be voicing all of these things when you make your offer to confirm that the seller really understands the benefits of working with you. So in summary here, because I'm running long in this episode and I want to wrap it up, think about making offers using the sandwich format. The top bun, establish credibility. Why are you the buyer for this deal? Why are you able to close? The meat of the sandwich, step 2, outline the terms of the offer, and if applicable, outline in plain English why those terms are compelling for the seller. Step 3, the bottom part of the sandwich here, close with additional reasons why working with you is helpful. And this really applies when you're going direct to seller. So I hope that this episode was helpful for all of you folks out there. If you think you learned something in this, if this is something that you're going to apply in your business, please consider leaving the podcast a rating and review. Helps the show get noticed by more folks, and it's always great to see those reviews come in. We're closing in on 275, so If you haven't already left a review and you've learned anything through the years that I've been releasing this podcast, please consider doing so. It takes 30 seconds and it really helps the show grow. But thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you guys next week.